Exclusive videos, story continuations, and bonus content are already available on Patreon before YouTube, so check the link in the description for early access to all new recaps and continuations. Changwoo opened his and didn't see anything. The darkness was absolute. The air smelled different. It musty dust of a sealed tomb, but something alive. Dry heat, natrum, cedar oil. He lay on stone floor, and the stone was warm. Not cold, as in a dungeon, and as if buildings stood under the sun. Changwoo sat and hit his head on low arch. The way was real. He felt the ceiling. Limestone. Smooth hewn. Not machine cut, but handwork with distinctive traces of chisel. His heart began faster. He knew these traces. He had them hundreds times in and in excavations. This is they stone during the Burr the Kingdom. It climbed into his and took out phone. The screen cracked, but the backlight was working. The battery showed 11%. He turned on the flashlight and pointed the beam ahead. A hallway. Narrow. The walls are covered with murals. The paints were vibrant. Not faded over millennia, but fresh. Blue lotus in a yellow background. Red sun-like discs. Black shapes with gold outlines. Changwoo rose to his and slowly walked along the wall. His fingers glided over the texture. The paint was wet in one spot, completely fresh. He pulled his hand and looked at the tips of his fingers. Blue pigment, Egyptian blue, calcium, and copper. It was at a temperature around 900 degrees, and the recipe was lost to the period. This pigment was applied recently. It be today. Changwoo stopped and leaned his back against the wall. He was too fast. His brain was a logical chain, and each link in chain was madness. Fresh paint, warm stone, traces of a chisel, the scent of natron. He was in operational Egyptian temple, not in ruins which he uncovered 3 hours ago, and in building which someone built and used. Right. He forced himself breathe more slowly. Panic kills faster any trap. This he learned in 8 years of illegal excavations. Initial information, then emotions. He turned the flashlight and shone it toward the murals. Cartouches. Royal names in oval frames. He read the first and felt as if the ground slipped from my feet. User mat of Setapenra, throne name of Ramses II. He read the second cartouche below. Bakken Hansu, high priest of Amun. Changwoo knew this name. Bakken Hansu held position high with 20th, 25th to 60th year of Ramses. If both cartouches were here at the same time, this narrowed the corridor. It was somewhere in the middle. Ramses the 13th. 13th century BC, our era. 13, 2 years ago from that, when he went into tomb with a lantern and a crowbar. Changwoo sat on floor. The phone showed 9%. He turned the flashlight and stayed in the dark. I need save, conserve battery power. I had think. The corridor led somewhere, and to other end their people. People who said in Middle Egyptian language and worshipped the gods with the heads of, and executed strangers without trial. He knew their laws. He knew their customs. He knew the layout, their temples better than their apartment. But he was a stranger, with black hair and Asian features, and in the world where such people were called one word, stranger. And strangers here were enslaved or killed. Changwoo stood up. Standing in was pointless. He went down into, that direction from was the air. After 50 steps, turned to the right. 30. 30 steps after the turn, he saw a light. Dim. Orange. An oil lamp. He hung up the phone and put it in pocket. The light grew brighter. The corridor widened. He stepped into a small chamber and froze. A woman stood before him, young, in a white linen dress with a wide red leather belt. Around her neck, a heavy necklace of turquoise and carnelian. Her head was shaved bald. Changwu knew what that meant. A priestess. She held a curved bronze knife in her hand. Not a ritual one, a combat knife, short and sharpened on both sides. She looked at him without surprise, as if she were waiting. Behind her in the chamber were two more, also women, also shaven-headed. One held a rope in her hands, the other held a small clay vessel with a narrow neck. Changwu recognized such vessels. They were used to store poisons. He raised his hands, palms forward, a universal gesture. He didn't know if it would work here, but there were no other options. The woman with the knife said something sharp. 3 short words. Changwu caught only one. Damn, stop. He stood still. She stepped closer and examined him from head to toe. His jeans, his sneakers, his t-shirt with the Seoul National University logo. She reached out and touched the fabric of the t-shirt, rubbed it between her fingers. Her face showed no emotion. She gave a short order, and 2 other women stepped forward. The one with the rope came up behind him. Changwu didn't resist as they tied his hands. The rope was made of palm fiber, rough, tight, a professional knot. The woman with the knife spoke again. This time, a long sentence. Changwu listened with all his might. His Middle Egyptian was academic. He had read texts, not listened to spoken language. The sounds blurred together, but he caught the gist. She was asking who he was and how he had ended up in the lower corridor. The lower corridor. So he was underground, beneath the temple. Changwu opened his mouth and tried to answer. His Egyptian sounded terrible. He knew it. The academic pronunciation, reconstructed based on Coptic analogies, had nothing in common with the living language. But he tried. He said he was lost, that he didn't know how he'd ended up here. The woman with the knife looked at him for a long time. Then she smirked, with one corner of her mouth. She told her companions that the stranger spoke the language of dead texts, as if reading from the walls of a tomb. It was an insult, and, at the same time, an accurate observation. His Egyptian really did sound like the language of funerary inscriptions. Archaic. Formal. Dead. They led him down the corridor. Up. Changwu counted the turns. Right, left, left again. A staircase with 12 steps. Another turn. He memorized the route automatically. A professional habit. There are no signs in tombs, only memory. They emerged onto the surface, and Changwu squinted. The sun hit him like a physical blow. White. Merciless. When he was able to open his eyes, he saw a courtyard. Large. Paved with limestone slabs. The walls were high. Columns with lotus-shaped capitals. He recognized this courtyard. Not because he'd been here before, because he'd studied its plans dozens of times. The Temple of Mut in Karnak, the southern part of the Amun temple complex, but not the ruined stump he'd seen in photos of the excavations, but whole, alive, with a roof and flags on the masts and the scent of incense wafting from every doorway. He was led across the courtyard to the building at the far end. He recognized that one too, the small temple of Sekhmet, the goddess of war and plague, the lion-headed goddess. A building that in his time had survived only as a foundation and 3 fragments of columns. Here it stood in all its grandeur, and the women who were leading him were priestesses of this temple, priestesses of Sekhmet. Chan Wu recalled everything he knew about this cult. Officially, the priestesses of Sekhmet practiced medicine and performed protective rituals. Unofficially, according to a number of Egyptologists, they were something of a secret service. Intelligence, counterintelligence, political assassinations. Poisons were their specialty. He looked at the clay vessel one of the women was carrying and thought that the academic theories had turned out to be true. They led him inside the temple, a dark hall with columns, oil lamps along the walls. In the center of the hall stood a statue of Sekhmet, twice the height of a man. Black granite, a lion's head, a sun disk on its crown. In front of the statue stood a low altar with offerings, fruit, bread, a bowl containing something dark. A woman with a knife pointed to the floor by the altar. Chang-Woo sat down. He crossed his legs. His hands behind his back ached from the rope. The woman left. 2 others remained. They stood by the walls and stared at him without blinking. Chang-Woo waited. The minutes dragged on. He heard sounds from outside, voices, footsteps, the distant creak of wheels. The city bustled around the temple. Karnak, the 13th century BC. He sat on the floor in the temple of the goddess of the plague, his hands bound, and waited for his fate to be decided. The phone in his pocket was useless, 9% battery, not a single cell tower within a 3,000-year radius. But there were photos on the phone, hundreds of photos, plans of tombs, diagrams of temples, translations of texts, and one photo that could either save his life or hasten his death. A map of the underground corridors of the Temple of Mut. The very map he had photographed from a scientific article before his trip. A map that showed every secret passage, every walled-up chamber, every trap. A map known only to the temple's builders 3,000 years ago. And now to Chang-Woo. The door swing open in an hour, maybe in 2. Chang-Woo not could say for sure. He thought the blows of his heart, but lost after 4,000. In the entered another woman. She was older, the 3, 40 or 45. Body is lean, veiny. Not a single unnecessary movement. The necklace on it was heavier and richer. Gold and lapis lazuli, the mark of rank. For her entered the very priestess with a knife. Young, shaven-headed. She stood up slightly behind and to the right, like a bodyguard. The senior priestess stopped in front of Chang-Woo and for a long time stared at him from and down. Then she sat on her haunches, slowly, smoothly, like a cat that stares a mouse, yet has decided whether or that effort. She began, and Chang-Woo immediately understood that she's speech was from the speech of priestesses. Slower, more clearly. She deliberately simplified her so that he understand. She asked where he had come from. Chang-Woo replied that from the land. This was true, in a sense. She asked how he got into lower corridors. He replied that didn't know. What had consciousness and woke up here? She nodded. I believe, but accepted, took note. Then she reached her and touched his t-shirt. Exactly, just as she, the priestess. But this time, she didn't just touch the fabric. She grabbed the edge and pulled up. Chang-Woo tensed, but didn't move. She examined fabric in the priestess of the lamp. She ran my finger along the seam, over logo, along synthetic threads. Her face remained motionless, but Chang-Woo noticed how, in for a second, her pupils. She had seen such fabric, such seams, such weave. She lowered the hem of her and looked it into eyes. She said one sentence. Chang-Woo translated it for himself like this. You don't from the east land. You not from part land that I know. He remained silent. The silence was safer any answer. She stood up and gave the order. Short, harsh. The young priestess stepped forward and placed Chang-Woo on his feet. They led down the corridors of the temple. Now deeper. Don't up, but down. Another staircase. More narrow. The steps had worn by thousands feet. They went down onto 2 levels down. Chang-Woo thought. 16 steps. A turn. 20 steps. Landing. Another 12 steps. Corridor to lower level was wider than the N in which he hid. The walls here were bare, no paintings, just smooth stone. This was working level, not for rituals, for action. They passed past several doors openings closed with heavy wooden doors. Behind one of them, Chang-woo heard moans. Quiet, muffled. He didn't think about this means. Not right now. They was into small cell. A stone bench along the wall. A clay jug with water. Oil lamp in niche. Nothing else. A young priestess untied his hands. The rope left deep red marks on her wrists. She pointed to the bench and left. The door closed. The sound of the bolt. Chang-woo sat and rubbed his wrists. He took out his phone. 8%. He didn't turn the screen. Instead that he closed his and began to remember. The plan of the temple Muth. He saw it dozens times. Upper level, front courtyard, column hall, sanctuary, side chapels. All this was well documented. The lower level was another matter. They was partially. A French expedition in 1890s in. I found entrances to the underground premises, but could go further the first two chambers. Debris, collapses, underground water. Then, in 2003, an Egyptian-British team used ground-penetrating radar and compiled a map of structures. It was this map Chang-woo took a picture of before the trip. The map showed 3 levels. The top, underground, middle, and lower. Lower level no one had opened it. On the ground-penetrating radar map, it looked like a labyrinth of narrow corridors and chambers, with one strange empty space in the center. A large hall measuring approximately 20 by 30 meters. Archaeologists had assumed it was an underground sanctuary. Chang-woo was now on the middle level. He was certain of this based on the number of steps and the direction of the descent. He knew that behind the wall of his chamber, 6 meters to the east, there was a bricked-up corridor leading to a staircase down to the lower level. He knew that this corridor was blocked by a stone plug weighing about 300 kilograms. He knew the dimensions of this plug, and knew that the ancient builders had left a bypass channel a cubit wide for ventilation. He knew all this because he had read 17 scholarly articles about this temple. But he didn't know why he needed this knowledge right now. He couldn't run through the walled-up corridor with his hands tied. And even with his hands free, he had nowhere to run. All of Karnak was one huge temple complex. Tens of thousands of priests and servants, guards, walls, gates. A stranger with an Asian face wouldn't make it 100 meters without being noticed. So running was out of the question. So he had to bargain. Chang-woo opened his eyes. In this world, he had exactly one commodity: information. He knew this temple better than those who served in it. He knew its past, present, and future. He knew which walls would crack, which cellars would flood, which statues would collapse. He knew which pharaoh would destroy which temple, and which priest would betray which god. 3,000 years of history compressed into the mind of a single illegal archaeologist. The question was how to sell this information without revealing its source. Because the truth was worse than any lie. A time traveler in ancient Egypt. That wouldn't inspire admiration. It would inspire terror. And here, terror was treated in only one way, with a bronze knife to the throat. The door opened again 2 hours later. This time, the high priestess entered alone, without guards. She was carrying a clay bowl of food, lentil soup with onions, coarse barley bread. She set the bowl on the bench next to him and sat down on the floor across from him. She just sat down, cross-legged, as an equal. Chang-woo took the bread and began to eat, slowly. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten. The woman was silent and waited. When he had finished eating, she spoke, this time even more slowly. She said her name was Heirin, that she was in charge of the lower sanctuary of the Temple of Mut, that the young priestess who had found him was her apprentice named Neferu. She said his clothes were made of a material that did not exist on Earth, that his language sounded like a language found in no country, that he had appeared in a sealed corridor that could not be entered from the outside because the entrance had been bricked up 50 years ago. She said all this calmly, like facts, without any questioning tone. She didn't ask. She made it clear to him that she knew. Then she fell silent and looked at him. And in her gaze, Changwu saw something he hadn't expected. Not fear, not curiosity, calculation. She was already figuring out how to use him. Changwu made a decision that would either save him or kill him. He slowly took his phone out of his pocket. Heirin didn't move. Only her eyes darted toward the object in his hand. He pressed the button. The screen lit up. 7%. Heirin didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She leaned forward and looked at the glowing rectangle. Changwu scrolled through the photos. He found the one he needed. A map of the underground levels of the Muth Temple. A ground-penetrating radar image. A top-down view. The corridors were marked with white lines. The cameras with gray rectangles. That very large hall in the center of the lower level. He turned the screen toward Heirin. She stared at the image. For a long time. Her face didn't change, but Changwu saw her knuckles turn white. She was clutching her knees so tightly that her nails dug into her skin. She recognized the map. She recognized her temple. And she realized that the man in front of her knew something he couldn't possibly know. The location of corridors that had been walled up and hidden. The chambers that no one knew about except the high priestesses. The hall deep inside that was never spoken of aloud. Heirin looked up from the screen and looked at Changwu. She said only 2 words. "Who are you?" But in those 2 words, there was no question. There was a verdict. Or a pardon. It depended on the answer. Changwu turned off his phone. 6%. He replied that he had come from a place where this temple no longer existed, where only the foundation and 3 fragments of columns remained, and that he knew everything that would happen to this place, from today until the moment the last stone crumbled to dust. Heirin was silent for 30 seconds. Changwu counted. Then she stood up. She brushed off her dress and said a phrase he would remember forever. She said that he now belonged to the temple, that his knowledge belonged to her, that he would live exactly as long as he was useful, and that he better be useful for a very long time. She left. The door closed. The bolt clanked. Changwu lay down on the stone bench and stared at the ceiling. He had just sold himself into slavery, voluntarily, for a bowl of lentil soup and a chance not to die today. The phone in his pocket showed 6% battery. The information in his head had no expiration date. On the next morning, Nefer brought him clothes. Coarse linen shenty, a short skirt to the knees, sandals made pom-pom. She threw everything on the bench and with a gesture pointed that he should change his clothes. Changwu took off his and jeans, sneakers, socks. He put everything neatly and put in corner of the room. The phone moved into the car. Neferu looked at his body without shyness, a professional look. She assessed the physical attributes. Height, meters 7'5", thin but muscular. 8 years of climbing through tombs and carrying stones left their mark. He was but he was, and a weakling. She said something briefly. Changwu made out the word Nexi. It meant southerner, or a foreigner. That's what they called everyone who was an Egyptian. She led him from the car and led down the hallway, upstairs, to middle level, then even higher. They went to service courtyard to the main building of the temple. Morning sun is not reached its strength yet. Changwu already felt the heat on his skin. Dry air scratched my throat. In the people, men and women. They carried jugs and sacks, they swept, they scraped stones. the servants of the temple. No one noticed to Changwu particular attention. Also one stranger. Another one. Pair of hands. Nefer brought him to a low building at the wall of the courtyard. Inside was a workshop. Stone shelves along the walls, clay vessels with pigments, brushes made reed, papyrus scrolls, several wooden tablets covered with wax for notes. Herein sat on low bench in back end. In front of it, in the floor, lay spread out sheet, large, about 1.5 meters. She raised her head when they entered and pointed Changwu to place on the floor in front themselves. He sat down. She spoke. At this time, faster than yesterday. Changwu strained his ears. His living Egyptian was with every hour. The brain adapted. She said that wants test his knowledge. What yesterday's image on the glowing stone could be a deception, a card, a trick by a charlatan. She wants proof. Changwu nodded. He expected this. She moved toward him the papyrus. It was blank. She placed next a reed brush and a bowl with black ink made soot. She said that he should draw the bottom level, not middle on which he and sell, lower, the one who she considered the greatest secret of the temple. Changwu took the brush. He knew that this exam of life. My hand was calm. 8 years of work taught him to draw plans quickly and accurately. Other archaeologists used software and laser rangefinders. Changwu got used to paper and a pencil. That's that illegal excavations do tolerate electronics, besides a phone with photos. He began draw. Main descent, the staircase of 24 steps, corridor to the right, first fork. Left corridor leads to the storage room, the right the row of cells. He was from memory, but memory from him was photographic, in that in regarding plans. For the buildings. Professional deformation. Other people remember faces. Changwu remembered the corridors. He drew 10 minutes. Hirin didn't interrupted. She moved. When he finished, he turned the papyrus toward her. She looked at the picture. For a long time. Changwu saw how she compared her plan with the EI. He saw the moment when she found the first match, then the second, then the third. He also saw the moment when she found it she didn't. The walled-up corridor to eastern part lower level. On its level, he was marked with a dotted line. On the map, this corridor connected the lower sanctuary with an unknown chamber beneath the outer wall of the temple. Archaeologists had assumed it was a secret exit, an evacuation route. Hirin pointed to the dotted line and asked what it was. Changwu replied that it was a passageway that had been sealed with stone, a long time ago, perhaps during construction. She shook her head slowly. She said that only 3 people knew about this passage. The high priestess of the temple, the builder who bricked it up, and now him. The builder died 40 years ago. The high priestess died 5 years ago. Hirin became the 4th when she took office, and now Changwu had become the 5th. She rolled up the papyrus and put it away in a leather case. Then she looked at him and said what would determine his position for the coming months. She said he wasn't a charlatan, that his knowledge was genuine, and that this made him both the most valuable and the most dangerous being in this temple. Valuable because he knows what has been forgotten, dangerous because he knows what must be hidden. She said he would work for her, only for her, that no one in the temple would learn of his knowledge. To everyone else, he would be a foreign servant, a sweeper, a porter, a nobody. She said that if he tried to tell anyone what he knew, they would kill him before he could finish his first sentence. Not her, others. Those who stood above her in the temple hierarchy and who would not tolerate a leak. Changwu listened and understood the situation. Hirin wasn't the temple's mistress. She was a middle manager, high enough to make decisions about prisoners, not high enough to protect him from those above her. She was using him for her own advancement. His knowledge was her trump card, her secret weapon in the temple hierarchy, and he was the expendable material for that weapon. Once the trump card was played, the material would be disposed of. Changwu replied that he understood the terms. Herin smirked, the same smirk with one corner of her mouth that he had already seen on Neferu. The mentor had taught her student well. She said he was being given one task to start with. The small temple of Sekhmet needs its foundation repaired. The northeast corner has sunk. The crack in the wall is widening. The pharaoh's engineers inspected the building and suggested shoring, a standard solution. But the shoring will spoil the temple's appearance. The Council of Priestesses is dissatisfied. She wants an alternative. Changwu closed his eyes and remembered. The small temple of Sekhmet, the northeast corner. Archaeological reports mentioned soil subsidence in this sector. The cause was known. An ancient irrigation canal ran beneath the foundation, which had been filled in during construction. Over time, the fill had compacted unevenly. The canal created a cavity beneath the foundation. The shoring addressed the problem from above, but the problem was from below. Changwu opened his eyes and said that the shoring wouldn't help, that in 5 years the corner would sink even deeper, and the shoring would collapse along with the wall, that an old canal ran beneath the foundation and the void needed to be filled. Crushed stone and a mixture of lime and sand, filling through pits dug from the outside at the base of the wall. Herin listened in silence. Then she asked how he knew about the canal beneath the foundation. Changwu replied that he had seen traces of the canal on the surface. It was a lie. He had seen the canal on the excavation plan. But the lie sounded convincing because the traces could indeed be seen if you knew where to look. A slight dip in the ground along the old channel, a different color of soil. Herin stood up and left the workshop, without saying a word. Neferu stayed behind and gestured to Changwu that he should wait. He waited for 2 hours. Then Neferu led him out into the courtyard. 4 workers were already digging a test pit at the northeast corner of the temple. Herin stood nearby and watched. When the shovels reached a depth of 1.5 meters, a worker shouted, he had struck a void, an old canal, exactly where Changwu had said. Herin turned to him. Her face was inscrutable. But Changwu read a new calculation in her eyes. He had just proven his worth, and in doing so, he had extended his life. For how long, he didn't know. Maybe a month. Maybe a year. It depended on how quickly his knowledge would run dry, or how quickly it would become a threat. That evening, Nefer led him back to his cell on the middle level, but now there was a reed mat on the bench, and in the niche next to the lamp stood a pitcher of beer. Small improvements, small rewards, like for a workhorse given an extra handful of grain after a good day. Changwu lay down on the mat and took out his phone. 5%. He scrolled through the photos, plans, maps, translations, hundreds of files. Every file was potentially another day of life, another task completed, another proof of usefulness. He turned off his phone and placed it under the mat. In the darkness of the cell, he heard footsteps in the corridor, voices, the distant sound of a sistrum, the ritual musical instrument of the priestesses of Sekhmet. The temple lived its own life. Thousands of people, dozens of secrets, a hierarchy of power and submission built up over centuries. And somewhere at the very bottom of that hierarchy, lying on a reed mat, was a man from the future, with a dying phone and a head filled with priceless knowledge, that was simultaneously his only protection and his greatest threat. The first 3 weeks passed in routine. During the day, Changwu worked as a servant. He carried water from the sacred lake, swept the yards, helped in the kids of the temple. Rough physical work, which made him invisible. Ordinary, ordinary servant, one of dozens. In the evening, Nefer was picked up by him to the workshop, and Ha-Rin asked questions. Always specific, always practical. What is depth of the water under the yard? Where drains? Drainage channels. Why red paint on columns of the hall fades faster than in the eastern ones? Chang Wu replied, sometimes in memory, sometimes by logic, sometimes I bluffed, but bluff was always based on facts that could verify, verified, and verified. Groundwater, he knew by hydrological reports. Drainage according to excavation plans. Paint according on chemical analysis of pigments. In the mutt. Western columns, where more direct sunlight and ultraviolet destroyed red iron faster. Hirin didn't thank, she praise. She accepted the information silently. She wrote it down on wax tablets or dictated to Nefer on papyrus. Then she let it back into cell. On fourth week, the significant event. In the morning, when Chang Wu was the floors in the hall, he heard a conversation between priestesses. They were quietly, but Chang Wu, to that point, already well understood the speech. The brain had adapted completely. It now thought in Egyptian, when listened and translated back into Korean, only for complex concepts. The priestesses said about the council, the great council of Sekhmet, which was about to ones in season, the next dip in 10 days, and in it we'll discuss the conflict, between the cult Sekhmet and the cult Amun. Chang Wu froze with a rag in his head. He knew about this conflict, from textbooks, from scientific articles, from deciphered papyri. The between cults was one of main political lines of kingdom. The priests of Amun were officially the powerful. The High of Amun was the second man in the state after the pharaoh. But the cult of Sekhmet controlled what did controlled Amun. Secret operations, intelligence, poisons, political assassinations. Two cults coexisted for decades in delicate balance. Chang Wu knew when this balance would be disrupted. I knew when the conflict. I knew who would win. And this knowing now burned him from within. In the evening, in the workshop, he decided to take a chance. When Ha-Rin finished her questions, he was the first to bring up the construction. For the first time in 3 weeks. He said he'd heard about the upcoming council meeting. Ha-Rin fell silent. Her gaze grew sharp. He said he knew about the conflict between Sekhmet and Amun, and that he knew how it would end. Ha-Rin stood up, slowly. She walked to the door and checked that no one was in the hallway. She closed the door. She returned and sat down, closer than usual. She asked quietly what he knew. Chang Wu paused. He understood the gravity of what he was about to say. One wrong word, and he could go from being a useful tool to being too dangerous to live. He began cautiously. He said that Amun's priests were currently preparing to expand their land holdings, that the high priest Bakan Hansu wanted to gain control over 3 villages south of Karnak, villages that currently belonged to the cult of Sekhmet. Heirin didn't move, but Chang Wu saw the muscles in her neck tense. This was new information for her, or confirmation of a suspicion she couldn't prove. He continued. He said that Bakan Kansu would act through the pharaoh. He would submit a petition on behalf of the temple of Amun. The pharaoh would approve it because Bakan Kansu had just completed the construction of a new hall in the main temple, and Ramses was indebted to him. Heirin listened, and her fingers dug into her knees again. Chang Wu knew all this not from a prophecy, from a papyrus found in 1927 in the archives of the Temple of Amun, an administrative document, a list of land redistributions from the 28th year of Ramses' reign. 3 villages south of Karnak had been transferred to the cult of Amun. No reasons given, just a fact. But this fact hadn't happened yet. Here and now, it was the future. And Chang Wu had just turned it into a weapon. Herin was silent for a moment. Then she asked the question Changwu had been expecting. She asked if it could be prevented. Changwu answered honestly. He said he didn't know. That his knowledge pertained to what had happened, not to what might have happened otherwise. If she intervened, events might take a different course, and then his knowledge of the future would become useless. Herin smirked. This time, with both corners of her mouth, almost a smile. She said he sounded like a priest of the oracle. Many words, little certainty. But she appreciated the warning. Changwu took another risk. He said this was only the beginning, that the conflict between Sekhmet and Amun would grow, that in a few years Amun's priests would gain such power that they could threaten the pharaoh himself, and that ultimately this would lead to a schism that would destroy the new kingdom. Herin stared at him, silently, for 10 seconds, 20. Then she spoke a single sentence. She said that he had just become 10 times more valuable and 10 times more dangerous than he was yesterday. She left. Neferu led him back to his cell. Changwu lay in the darkness and thought. He had just raised the stakes. From a repair consultant, he had turned into a political oracle. This would prolong his life, but it would also make him an enemy to anyone who wanted to eliminate Herin, because his knowledge was her weapon, and an enemy's weapons are destroyed first. The next morning, Neferu took him not to the courtyard for his usual work, but back to the workshop. Herin was waiting for him with papyrus and ink. She said she had a new task. She wanted to know everything he knew about the priests of Amun, names, titles, connections, weaknesses, a chronology of their actions for the coming years. Changwu sat down and began to speak. He spoke for 4 hours. Herin wrote everything down. Bakan Kansu, high priest, has served since the 25th year of the reign, will die in office in 15 years. His successor, Ramessinekt, more aggressive. It is under him that the priests of Amun will begin to openly challenge the pharaoh's decisions. The land holdings of the Temple of Amun will grow to 1/3 of all cultivated land in Egypt, 1/3 of the entire state in the hands of a single cult. Herin was taking notes. Her face was calm, but Changwu could see that her writing was getting faster. The information was too valuable, too detailed, too specific. When he finished, she rolled up the papyri and placed them in a leather case, the very one in which his map of the underground corridors was kept. She said he would no longer work in the courtyard, that from this day forward, he was assigned to the workshop, that his cover story for the others was a translator of documents from Eastern languages, a rare specialist whom the temple had hired for a large sum of money. Changwu understood what had happened. He had just been promoted, from servant to specialist, from sweeper to valuable asset. The cell remained the same. The rope around his wrists could also return at any moment. But the corridor had become a little longer. The room to maneuver was slightly wider. That evening, Neferu brought him dinner. Not lentil soup, but fish. Fried tilapia with onions and barley bread. Changwu ate slowly and thought. In 10 days, the Grand Council. Herin would go there with his information. If she used it correctly, she would strengthen her position. If not, they were both dead. And the most agonizing part was that Changwu couldn't control the process. He could only provide information. She was the one making the decisions. He was a bullet in someone else's gun, useful exactly once, until the shot was fired. In 3 days before the Herin came to the workshop late in the evening, alone, without Neferu. That was the first time that she showed up without accompaniment. Changwu was sitting on the floor and tried to memorize the contents of the photos on the phone until the battery has died completely. 3%. He was the data from digital memory to biological. I photographed with my eyes every diagram, every plan, every line of the text. I closed my eyes and reproduced from memory. Again, reopened and checked. Herin entered and sat across from him. She brought a small leather pouch. She untied it and emptied the contents onto the floor between them. 3 clay plates, measuring about palm. Chengwu glanced and realized that it was reports. Reports from agents of the Sekhmet from other cities. Each plate was inscribed in cursive, which he read with difficulty. But Herin didn't expect that he would read them. She retold the content herself. The first sign from Memphis. Priests of Amun in Memphis began to build a new storage facility for grain. The storage facility is unnecessary for the record of the country. That means they are preparing to receive grain from new lands, land of which belong to them, yet don't. Changwu nodded. This confirmed his information. Bakken Honsu plans to expand in advance, building infrastructure before that it receives resources. Strategic thinking. The second tablet from Abydos. The priests of Amun sent a delegation to the ruler of the city with gifts, expensive ones, gold and linen fabrics. Gifts of this quality are not out of courtesy. They are buying. Third sign from Luxor, from the eastern part of Karnak, literally next door. Assistant of Bakken Honsu named Unnefer was dating with the head of Deverth, the guard, twice in the past week. This took place at night, not in the temple, but in residential neighborhood. Herin finished retelling and looked at Changwu. She waited the results. Changwu thought. The name Unnefer he knew, from the inscription in tomb number 40 in Valley of the Nobles. Unnefer was the treasurer of the Temple of Amun, not an assistant, the treasurer. Since Herin called him an assistant, that means he hadn't been promoted yet, or perhaps he had been promoted, but the information hadn't reached the cult of Sekhmet. In any case, Unnefer was a key figure. In the textbooks, he was mentioned as the man who reformed the financial system of the Temple of Amun. It was his reforms that allowed the temple to become an economic superpower. Changwu decided to talk about this, but carefully, without mentioning the future. He said that Unnefer was more dangerous than he seemed, that he wasn't just an assistant, but the future treasurer, that he, specifically, would make the Temple of Amun rich, truly rich, and that meetings with the chief of the guard meant that Bakken Khonsu wanted military support for his plans. Herin listened in silence. Then she asked how he knew about Unnefer. Changwu replied that he had seen documents. That was true in a certain sense. He had seen an inscription in Unnefer's tomb, a tomb that hadn't been built yet. Herin didn't press him further. She was already used to the fact that his knowledge defied normal explanation. She asked another question, a practical one. What to do about Unnefer? Changwu didn't answer right away, because this question had a hidden meaning. What to do could mean many things. For a priestess of a cult that specialized in poisons and political assassinations, it meant one specific thing. He chose his words carefully. He said that eliminating Unnefer would solve nothing. Another would take his place, perhaps a worse one. It was better to know the enemy than to create a new one. Herin tilted her head slightly. It was a gesture of approval, or of thought. With her, they looked the same. She gathered the tablets back into the pouch and stood up. Before leaving, she paused in the doorway and turned around. She said that the council would include the senior priestesses from the 7 temples of Sekhmet throughout Egypt, the 7 most influential women in the state's secret hierarchy, and that for the first time in her career, she would speak to them from a position of strength. Thanks to him. She didn't thank him. She simply stated the fact, and left. Changwu sat in silence, realizing the scale of it all. 7 temples, 7 cities, A secret network that permeated all of Egypt. Intelligence, counterintelligence, poisons, assassinations. And he had just become the intellectual engine of one of the nodes in this network. He took out his phone. 2%. He opened the photos and scrolled to one in particular. A chronological table. Major events of Ramses II's reign. Year by year. Wars, treaties, construction projects, religious reforms, deaths and appointments. He looked at this table and memorized it. Every line, every date. Because when the phone dies, this table will exist only in his head, and it will be worth more than gold. The screen flickered. 1%. Chang Wu turned off the phone. He placed it on the floor next to him. A small black rectangle, the last artifact from his world. Soon it would be just a piece of glass and metal. Useless. Just like its owner if he ceased to be useful. In the morning before the council meeting, Heirin came again, this time with a specific request. She wanted to know Baken Honsu's weaknesses. Not political ones, but personal ones. Chang Wu tensed. Personal weaknesses. Textbooks didn't mention the personal weaknesses of high priests, nor did academic articles. But there was circumstantial evidence. The stele in the Temple of Amun that Baken Honsu had erected for himself. A long text, an autobiography. In it, he described his career from boy assistant to high priest. 60 years of service. And between the lines, his personality shone through. A man who built himself up from nothing. No noble lineage, no connections. Only service and devotion. Such people shared one common weakness. They could not tolerate disrespect. Every hint of lowly origins was a knife to them. Every reminder that they were nobodies was a wound. Chang Wu told Heirin about this, not about the stele, about the psychology. He said that Baken Honsu was a self-made man, that his pride was his strength, and his weakness, that the right words could make him act impulsively, lose face, make a mistake. Heirin listened and nodded, slowly, rhythmically. She absorbed the information like dry earth absorbs water. She left, and Chang Wu remained alone in the workshop. That evening, Neferu brought him dinner, and, for the first time, spoke to him not with orders, but with words. She asked if he believed Heirin would win at the council. Chang Wu looked at her intently. A young priestess, devoted to her mentor, but with a mind of her own and her own ambitions. He replied that Heirin was smarter than anyone he had met in this temple. Neferu smirked and replied that he had met only 4 people. It was true, and it was funny. Chang Wu almost smiled, for the first time in a month. Neferu left. Chang Wu lay on the mat and thought about the council, about the 7 senior priestesses, about Heirin with her papyri full of his knowledge, and about himself. A man from the future who sat in a stone chamber beneath the temple and could only wait. Wait until others decided his fate. He hated waiting. All his life he had acted on his own. He chose the tombs himself. He broke the seals himself. He took the risks himself. Here, he was a passive pawn in someone else's game. And that was worse than the ropes around his wrists. The council began at dawn. Chang Wu was present. He was in a cell for before that, as the first priestesses began gather. Neferu brought him breakfast and said one word. Wait. He waited. The hours dragged on. He sat on stone bench and listened the silence. The average level was empty. All priestesses went upstairs. All servants were busy serving the council. Chang Wu remained alone in dungeon, with a jug of water and my own thoughts. He thought about what was upstairs. The 7 of the priestesses of the 7 cities. Each controlled its territory, their network of agents, its collection of and compromising material. Together they formed a shadow government of Egypt, invisible, unaccountable, effective. Chang Wu knew of the existence of this structure from indirect sources, fragments of papyri, strange coincidences of deaths, unexplained political decisions. Egyptologists have been debating for decades, existed a secret order of open blues, or is conspiracy fantasy? Now he knew the answer. It existed. And he worked on one of his nodes. By noon became unbearable. Chang Wu stood up and began to walk around cell. 4 steps into one direction, 4 in the other. The walls were closing in. The ceiling was suffocating. The air stood still. The heat rose from below, from the stone that was warming up by the sun through the earth above them. He stopped and pressed his hand to the east wall. Behind this wall, in 6 meters, began a walled-up corridor to lower level. That very one at which we only Havrin and him. Secret exit. Emergency route. If everything goes badly, the meeting. If Herin loses, if decide that the foreigner with impossible knowledge is dangerous. He needed a escape. Not, but just in case. He sat on floor and began draw with his finger across the dusty stone. Route from thee to the walled-up corridor, through 2 walls. The first wall of his cell. Limestone. Thickness is approximately 30 centimeters. The second wall of the hallway. This one. Between them, filled with space. Without tools, it is impossible. With tools, 2 days of work, maybe 3. If work quietly. If find something to the stone. A copper chisel, stone hammer, temple construction tools. They are for repair constantly. To steal 1 chisel would take work. Chang Wu erased the drawing with his palm. Too early. First, we wait the results of the council. The door opened when the sun had set. He realized this by the temperature of the stone. The walls were cooling down. Nefru was in the doorway. Her face was unreadable. She said that Heirin is waiting him, upstairs. Chang Wu went up the stairs. Middle level. Top. Column hall. Past. Through side passage to the small room which he used to had seen. The room for private encounters. Low ceilings. Oil lamps. The scent of myrrh and sweat. Heirin sat on wooden chair. She on the floor. On chair with armrests and a backrest. Status. Next to stood a small table with a pitcher of autumn and 2 cups. 2 bowls. One for her, the second for him. Chang Wu sat on the shuttle across her. She poured. She poured wine into both cups and handed one to him. He took it. Red, thick, sweet. Egyptian wine was sweet because the grapes were harvested late. He took a sip and waited. Heirin drank in silence. Then she spoke. The meeting had gone well. She had presented information about Bakan Hansu's plans, about the granary in Memphis, about the delegation to Abydos, about Unnefer's nighttime meetings with the chief of the guard. The senior priestesses listened. Some of the information was already known to them. Some was not. But when Hedin pieced all the facts together into a single picture, the reaction was strong. She didn't say exactly what it was, but from the way she held the bowl, from the way her shoulders relaxed, Chang Wu realized that the reaction was in her favor. She had received approval, support, resources. But then her voice changed. It grew quieter. She said that a problem had arisen. One of the senior priestesses, from Heliopolis, a woman named Meriptha, the eldest, the most experienced. She asked a question. Where did Hedin get such precise information? There are no such sources in the usual intelligence network. Such details cannot be obtained through ordinary agents. Hedin replied that she had a special source. Meriptha asked which one. Hedin refused to answer. She cited security. Meriptha didn't press the issue, but Hedin saw her eyes. Meriptha remembered, and she would dig deeper. Changwu set the bowl down on the floor. His hands were steady, but inside, everything tightened. Meriptha of Heliopolis. He didn't know that name. Not from textbooks, not from articles, not from papyri. It was a blind spot. He could predict Bakan Hansu's actions years in advance because the high priest of Amun was a public figure whose deeds were carved in stone. But the secret agents of the secret order left no inscriptions. They didn't erect stelae. They didn't write autobiographies. Meriptha was invisible. And now, the Invisible One was hunting for his secret. Chan Wu told Heirin that he needed to know everything about Meriptha: age, habits, allies, enemies, methods. Heirin raised an eyebrow. For the first time, he was demanding information rather than giving it. She took a sip of wine and said that Meriptha was 62 years old, that she had led the Heliopolitan Temple of Sekhmet for 30 years, that she had outlived 4 pharaohs and 3 high priestesses, that her network of agents was the oldest and most extensive, and that she had a habit of eliminating problems before they became threats. Changwu asked if she meant eliminating them literally. Heirin looked at him for a long time. Then she said that in the 30 years of Meriptha's reign, there had not been a single political scandal in Heliopolis. Not a single one. In a city with 5,000 priests and 24 temples. This was no accident. It was prevention. Changwu understood. Prevention. Eliminating potential problems before they become real. He was a potential problem right now. A source of impossible information. An anomaly in the system. Meriptha would want to know what he was, and once he found out, he would want to eliminate him. He finished his wine, sweet and warm. It warmed his throat, but not his thoughts. He told Heirin that they needed a cover story, a plausible explanation for his knowledge, not for their own people, for outsiders, for Meriptha. Heirin nodded. She had already thought of this. She suggested an option. A merchant from the eastern coast. A Canaanite. A merchant who traded in information rather than goods. Such people existed. Canaan's trade networks spanned the entire eastern Mediterranean and served as a source of intelligence for all sides. Changwu shook his head. The cover story wouldn't hold up. His face isn't Canaanite. His accent isn't Canaanite. Any merchant from Canaan would spot the fake in a minute. He suggested another possibility. A fugitive scribe from Hattusa, the capital of the Hittites. The Hittites were far away, hard to verify. The Hittite court was full of spies and defectors. A fugitive scribe who had fled with secret documents and sold them to the first buyer. Heirin considered this. She said the Hittite version explained his strange accent. The Hittite language is not like Egyptian. A man speaking Hittite would mangle Egyptian exactly as Chan Wu had mangled it. She said it was a good story. Not perfect, but enough to buy some time. She stood up. She took the jug of wine. She left him an empty bowl. A little reminder. Wine was a treat, not a habit, not a right. A privilege that is given and taken away. Chang Wu went down to his cell alone, unescorted. For the first time. That, too, was a sign, not of trust, of control. They let him walk alone because there was nowhere to run, and because now 2 priestesses he hadn't seen before were on duty in the middle-level corridors. Guards. Not for him, after him. He lay down on the mat and closed his eyes. Meriptha of Heliopolis, the Invisible One, the Hunter. 62 years of experience against his 32 years of life, of which only the last 5 weeks had been lived in this world. He needed more information. Not from the past, from the present. He needed eyes and ears in the temple. He needed allies, not masters, allies. People who would help him not because he was useful, but because it was in their best interest. He thought of Nefer, a young priestess with ambitions of her own, loyal to Ha-Rin, but not blindly so. She could be the first, if he found the right approach. In 3 days after the council, Meriptha did not leave from Karnak. The rest 6 senior priestesses went their separate ways to their cities to the morning. Meriptha remained. Ha-Rin reported about this Chang Wu in the workshop without unnecessary explanations. It's simply fact. Meriptha remains. He lives in guest chambers of the Muth. Every day he performs rituals. Every evening he has with younger priestesses. He talks. He asks questions. Listens. Chang Wu understood the tactic. Meriptha was looking him directly. She gathered information through those around her. She listened to the gossips. I noticed the details. Who goes where? Who meets with whom? Which stranger showed up a month ago, and why it was transferred from the fun to translators. Direct questions she did. She didn't need. The fun is village. In village, everything everyone knows. Chang Wu decided not wait. He asked Ha-Rin to meet with Neferu, separate, without Ha-Rin. Ha-Rin looked at him with curiosity. She asked why. He replied that he learned the shorthand, for work on documents. Neferu the best teacher, because that she closest of all to him in age and patience. Ha-Rin smiled. She realized that the reason was, but didn't object, or trusted him in this extent, or wanted to see what of this would come of it. Neferu came in his cell, that. She brought a tablet and a stylus. Chang Wu did studied cursive. That was not a lie. He really needed it, this skill. Temple were in cursive, but not with hieroglyphs. And read them was necessary if he wanted to understand what was around him. But between exercises, he talked with Neferu, carefully, without pressure. Asked about her. How years is in the temple? How did here? What it attracts in serving Sekhmet? Neferu replied briefly. She came to them at 12 years old. She mother who could to feed 5 children. The temple took her because that she was fast and quiet, 2 qualities that were valued in intelligence. She is 23 now, 11 years in the order, 4 of those under Ha-Rin's command. Chang Wu listened and memorized, not the biographical details, but the intonations. When Neferu spoke of Ha-Rin, her voice changed. It became more even, drier. Respect without warmth. Loyalty without affection. She served Ha-Rin because Ha-Rin was the best, not because she loved her. That was important, because loyalty without love has a price, and if someone offers more, loyalty might renegotiate the contract. Chang Wu didn't plan to buy Neferu off. He planned to make himself useful to her, independent of Ha-Rin, a separate value, a separate connection, insurance. On the second evening of their sessions, he asked her a question, what she knew about the Meripth. Neferu froze. The stylus paused over the wax. She looked at him, and something new flashed in her eyes. Not suspicion, assessment. She was reevaluating him in real time. Until that moment, he had been a tool of Ha-Rin to her, a thing, a valuable thing, but a thing. Now he was asking strategic questions. Things don't ask strategic questions. She answered. Meripith walks through the temple like a shadow, talks to the laundresses, to the cooks, with the boys who clean the lamps. She isn't looking for anything specific. She's creating a picture, a general one, a complete one. And when the picture is ready, she'll find what doesn't fit into it. Chang Wu asked what didn't fit right now. Neferu answered with one word. Him. A stranger who appeared out of nowhere. He speaks a strange form of Egyptian. He worked as a servant for 3 weeks and suddenly became a translator. He doesn't meet with anyone except Hedin and Neferu. He lives in an underground cell rather than the servants' quarters. This is an anomaly. And Meriptah sees anomalies the way a cobra sees movement. Not with his eyes, with his whole body. Changwu nodded. He appreciated Neferu's honesty. She didn't sugarcoat or embellish. Just like Hedin. Frankness was a trait of the order, or a trait of these 2 specific women. In any case, straightforward people are easier to deal with. He told Neferu that he needed help. Not from Hedin, from her personally. He said that Meriptah would get to him sooner or later, and when that happened, he would need to know what she knew. He needed eyes to watch the hunter while the hunter watched the prey. Neferu looked at him for 5 seconds. Then she asked what she would get in return. Changwu answered. He said he knew the future of the Temple of Sekhmet. Not just the upcoming conflict with Amun. Everything. Decades into the future. Hedin gets tactics from him, information for current battles. But he can give Neferu a strategy. Where she should be in 5 years. What position to take. Which people to avoid. How to build her own career within the order. Neferu was silent. For a long time. A minute. Then she set the stylus down on the tablet and asked if Hedin knew about this proposal. Changwu replied that he did not. Neferu stood up, gathered the tablet and stylus, walked toward the door, stopped, turned around, said that tomorrow Meriptah would be dining in the temple garden, in the southern part, near the pool, alone, unaccompanied, every day from noon until the middle of the 2nd hour. She goes out into the sun and eats figs. It's a habit. Habits create opportunities. Neferu left. Changwu lay down on the mat and stared into the darkness. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She gave him information. For free. Or on credit. The difference would become clear later. But the fact remained. He had a second contact in the temple. Not the mistress. Not the overseer. An informant. The next day, Changwu went out into the courtyard at noon. He had the right to move about the upper level as part of his cover as a translator. He walked through the colonnaded hall, past the sanctuary, through a side passage to the south garden. The garden was small, a few palm trees, blooming acacias, a small rectangular pool with murky green water, a sacred pond for ritual ablutions. A woman was sitting on a stone bench by the pool, small, thin, with a wrinkled face the color of dark bronze, gray hair, cut short, not shaved like the young priestesses, a privilege of age. She was eating figs, slowly, carefully. She broke each fruit in half and examined the flesh before eating it. Meriptah. Changwu did not approach. He walked past at a distance of 10 paces, like a servant going about his business. He did not look at her, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw that she was looking at him. 1 second. 2. A disinterested gaze, a routine scan of the surroundings, or a perfect imitation of a routine scan. With Meriptah, it was impossible to tell the difference. Changwu walked through the garden and returned to the workshop. He had seen the enemy, a little old woman with figs. 62 years in a secret war. 3 decades at the head of one of the 7 centers of invisible power. And she was eating figs, breaking each one open and checking for worms inside. A poisoner's habit, to check everything, even fruit, even in her own temple. Changwu thought he had no chance of deceiving this woman. The legend of the Hittite scribe would crumble at the first serious interrogation. So he couldn't deceive her. So he needed another way. He didn't know what that was yet, but he knew one thing. He who runs from the cobra dies of exhaustion. He who stands still may live longer, if the cobra decides he is not prey. Meriptha found him first. On 5th day after the council, in the morning. Chang-Wu went from the workshop to storage for ink. Usual route, short corridor, turn, and she was standing by the wall, as if he was waiting, or as he just walked by. With Meriptha there were coincidences. She spoke first. Her was low, calm, every word separately, like stones stacked into a wall. She said that he was looking help a translator. She has a one in an Eastern language, Hittite. She heard that the new translator at the temple, Muth, is fluent Hittite. Chan-Wu stopped. His heart was beating steady. He was himself for the 5 days. I imagined this meeting. I went over options. He wasn't ready. But he was ready for that not ready. He bowed, briefly, respectfully, like a subordinate before superiors. He replied to his uneven Egyptian that is ready to help. Meriptha smiled, subtle, with just lips. She took from the folds of a small piece of papyrus, a rolled up into tube. She held to him. Chan-Wu unfolded. Text. Cuneiform. Hittite cuneiform. 8 lines. Chan-Wu looked at badges and felt as the floor slipped from my feet. He could read cuneiform. Basic level. Any archaeologist who has worked with the Near Middle had the basics. But Hittite cuneiform differed from Akkadian. Other characters. Different grammar. Other ideograms. He could make out about 1/3 of the text. Maybe half. If I'm lucky. But if he can't be able to read the text, his legend will crumble. Hittite scribe who can Hittite text is not scribe. He looked at the papyrus more closely. The first 2 characters were familiar. Familiar. The first of greeting. Standard opening of a letter. He had seen such in textbooks. The 3rd line contained the king's name. He recognized it. Hattusili. Hattusili III, king of the Hittites. A contemporary of Ramses II. The author of the famous peace treaty. Chang-Wu knew this treaty. He knew its text. He knew its history. He knew its terms. He had read it dozens of times in translation. And now, before him, was a fragment of correspondence between the Hittite and Egyptian courts. Perhaps a copy. Perhaps the original. He began to read aloud. Slowly. Hesitantly. Deliberately hesitantly. He didn't want to appear too competent. A translator who is too competent raises questions. An average translator causes only mild irritation. He translated the first 4 lines. A greeting formula from the court of Hattusili to the court of Ramses. A request for a shipment of silver for the temple of the god of thunder. Standard diplomatic correspondence. Nothing secret, nothing dangerous. He couldn't read the 5th line completely. Unfamiliar symbols. He honestly admitted he couldn't make out that fragment. He translated the 6th and 7th lines roughly. Something about a trade route along the coast. He recognized the 8th line. The closing formula. Standard. Meriptha listened to his translation in silence. When he finished, she took the papyrus. She rolled it up carefully, hid it back in the fold of her dress. Then she asked a question. A simple one. Where had he learned cuneiform? Chang-Wu answered with a stock phrase. In Hattusa. In the palace archives. He had been an apprentice to the chief scribe. Meriptha nodded. She asked the senior scribe's name. Chang-Wu gave the name he remembered from the Hittite tablets. Piasili, chief of the palace scribes under Hattusili III, a real historical figure. Meriptha gave no indication of whether she recognized the name or not. She thanked him for the translation, politely, formally, and she left. Changwu stood in the corridor and felt sweat on his back. His shirt clung to his skin. He had just gone through his first interrogation, or his first test. The text on the papyrus could be genuine, or it could be a forgery, a test. If Meripta knew Hittite, she could have assessed the quality of his translation. If she didn't, she could have sent the papyrus to a real expert for comparison. In any case, he had bought himself some time. His translation wasn't brilliant, but it was competent. The errors in the 5th line were plausible. No translator reads any text perfectly. He returned to the workshop and told Heirin about the meeting. Everything. No secrets. Hiding his contact with Meripta would be foolish. Heirin would find out anyway, and a lie would cost more than the truth. Heirin listened in silence. Her face darkened with every sentence. When he finished, she stood up and walked over to the wall. She pressed her palm against the stone. She thought. She said the papyrus was intelligence. Meripta is verifying the legend. If the translation is correct, the legend will withstand the first blow. If it's incorrect, Meripta will learn that he is not who he claims to be. Changwu asked if Meripta might know Hittite. Heirin replied that Meripta knows everything. For 30 years, she had gathered knowledge the way others gather gold. She had an archive in Heliopolis that rivaled the royal library. Translators, spies, merchants. She bought information from anyone who could sell it. Yes, Meripta could have known Hittite, or have someone who does. Changwu sat on the floor and closed his eyes. He was thinking. His translation was about 70% accurate. The 30% he couldn't translate, or had translated only roughly, was his vulnerability. If Meripta checked it and found errors, she wouldn't conclude that he was a bad translator. She would conclude that he wasn't from Hattusa. And if he wasn't from Hattusa, then who was he? And where did his knowledge of the dungeons of the Temple of Mut come from? A chain of questions leading to a single answer. To the truth. To an impossible truth that no one in this world could accept. Heirin turned away from the wall. Her decision was made. She said they needed to act preemptively, not wait until Meripta finished his investigation. Give her what she was looking for. A controlled leak. Half the truth that would satisfy her curiosity and put the matter to rest. Changwu asked which half. Heirin replied. She would tell Meripta that he was not a Hedian scribe, that he was a man of unknown origin with inexplicable knowledge, and that she, Heirin, had found him, captured him, interrogated him, and was using him, that his knowledge worked, tested, verified, that the source of the knowledge was unclear, but the result was reliable. Changwu shook his head. That doesn't solve the problem. It creates a new one. If Meripta finds out that he is the source of impossible knowledge, she will want to take him for herself, or destroy him. Heirin looked at him, and for the first time, something resembling respect flashed in her gaze, or recognition. She said that he was thinking correctly, but not all the way through. Meripta isn't an enemy. Meripta is a partner, a potential one. If Changwu's knowledge pertains to all of Egypt and not just Karnak, then it's valuable to all 7 temples. And if Heirin offers Meripta access to this knowledge in exchange for an alliance, she'll gain the most powerful ally in the order. Changwu understood the plan, and he grew cold. Heirin was going to sell him wholesale, not to one mistress, but to 2. His chain was getting longer, but there were more links in it. And every link was a throat through which he could be strangled. The meeting Heirin and Meripta took place 2 days, at night, in Lower Sanctuary. Changwu was present, but Heirin told to him the contents of the following morning. She recounted dryly, facts, without judgment. Meripta listened to the proposal. She interrupted. She asked questions. Until Heirin, until finished. Then asked 3. The first one. How long Ha-Rin been the source? Ha-Rin replied that 5 weeks. Second. How accurate his predictions? Ha-Rin listed the confirmed facts. Channel under the foundation. Grain storage in Memphis. The delegation in Abydos. Meetings un Nefer. 4 of 4. 100% accuracy. Third question. What source wants? Ha-Rin replied that he wants to live. Meripthak was silent. Then she said that it reasonable wish, and that she wants to see him, in person. Ha-Rin agreed. I'll meet appointed to the next evening. Chang-Woo listened to this retelling, and felt as he the corridor he's of possibilities. Every new decision was made without him, because him. They were as an object that is shown to the buyer. It could refuse, theoretically. In practice, refusal meant death. He-Rin did threaten. She didn't the word death. She simply was reality, in which his existence had meaning only within the context of her plans. Beyond the limits of those plans, he ceased to exist. Not metaphorically, literally. That evening, Nefru led him into the private meeting room, the very same one where he had drunk wine with Ha-Rin after the council. Now there were 3 chairs here, 3 bowls. Ha-Rin sat in the center, Meriptha to the right. The left chair stood empty, for him. Chang-Woo entered and stopped. He looked at Meriptha, and Meriptha looked at him. Up close, she looked older than she had in the garden. Deep wrinkles, thin skin, knotty hands with bulging veins. But her eyes were young, black, sharp. The eyes of a bird of prey in the body of an old woman. Hedin gestured toward a chair. Chang-Woo sat down. Meripta spoke first. No greetings, no pleasantries. She said she knew he wasn't a Hittite scribe, that his translation of the papyrus contained 2 characteristic errors made by someone who knew Akkadian cuneiform, but not Hittite. A scribe from Hattusa would not have confused those signs. Chang-Woo remained silent. It was pointless to deny it. Meripta continued. She said she had checked all the trade caravans from the east over the past 3 months. Not a single one had brought people with his facial features. She had checked the ports, river and sea. Not a single traveler matching his description had crossed the Egyptian border. He had appeared out of nowhere, like a ghost, or like a god. She fell silent and waited. Chang-Woo realized that silence was no longer an option. He had to speak, and he made the decision that had been forming over the past 5 days. Not to lie. Not completely. To tell the truth, but one that couldn't be verified, and couldn't be disproved. He said he had come from a time that had not yet arrived, that in his time, this temple lay in ruins, that he knew the history of this land thousands of years into the future, that he was not a god, not a demon, not a messenger, just a man who found himself out of place in time. Silence. The oil lamps crackled. Shadows moved across the walls. Meripthak looked at him for 10 seconds, 20, 30. Then she turned to Ha-Rin and asked if she believed it. Ha-Rin replied that she didn't, that she believed only in results, and the results are flawless. Meripthak looked at Chang-Woo again. She asked a question. If he knows the future, does he know her future? Chang-Woo answered honestly. He said no. That the history he knows is the history of kings and temples, of great events, of wars and treaties, of construction and destruction. Individual people in this history are either recorded or they are not. Bahenkansu is recorded because he was the high priest of Amun. His name is carved in stone. Meriptha is not recorded. Her name appears nowhere. Because the secret servants of the state leave no names. Meriptha smiled. For the first time. A dry smirk from an old woman who was hard to surprise. She said this was the best news in a long time. That the absence of her name in the stone meant she had done her job right. Invisibility is success, not oblivion. She turned to Ha-Rin, said she accepted the offer. that she wanted to receive information from the source, regularly. In exchange, she offered protection, her network, her resources, and her silence. Heirin nodded. The deal was sealed without a handshake, without papyri, without witnesses except for Changwu. Meriptha stood up and headed for the door. She stopped, turned to Changwu. She asked one last question. Did he know how Ramses' reign would end? Changwu replied. Ramses would die an old man, in the 67th year of his reign, the longest reign in Egyptian history. But after his death, the collapse would begin. His successor, Merneptah, would be old and weak. The pharaohs who followed would be even weaker. The priests of Amun would seize real power. In 200 years, the new kingdom would cease to exist. Meriptha listened motionless. Then she nodded slowly. She said she was 62 years old, that she wouldn't live to see the collapse, but that she wanted to know that her temple would outlive her, that the order would survive, that what she had been building for 30 years would not disappear a generation after her death. She left. Heirin remained. They sat in silence. Then Heirin poured wine into 2 bowls. Again, just like last time. She handed him a bowl and said he had just acquired a second mistress. Changwu took the bowl and replied that the number of masters did not change a slave's status. Heirin looked at him with that expression he was beginning to recognize, a mixture of calculation and something elusive. Not pity, not sympathy, rather an acknowledgement of another's pain without any desire to ease it. She said he wasn't a slave, that a slave doesn't choose whom to serve, but he had chosen, twice. Changwu took a sip of wine and didn't argue. She was technically right. He had chosen, between death and submission, between the knife and the chain. It was a choice, formally. In essence, it was survival. And survival isn't a choice. Survival is a reflex. At night in his cell, he lay awake and thought about Meriptah, the old woman who wanted her legacy to outlive her. That was understandable. It was human. And it was dangerous. Because people who build a legacy are ready to do anything to protect it. And if Changwu became a threat to that legacy, Meriptah would remove him without hesitation, without malice, without emotion, like removing a stone from the road, simply because it's in the way. Meriptah left from Karnak through 2 days after the meeting. Before leaving, she left Heirin 3 items. A pouch with gold rings. Pay. Not for Changwu, for Heirin. For information. Scroll with the seal of the temple. A letter. Letter. With him, Heirin could talk to any agent Meriptah at any city inn and get help. And a little clay amulets in the shape of lioness, the symbol of Sekhmet, but not ordinary one, with special mark on the side. 3 parallel scratches. Heirin showed the amulet Changwu and explained. 3 scratches meant the highest level in the Meriptah. Such amulets existed more than 10 in all Egypt. Each gave the bearer the right to immediate assistance and absolute silence from the agents. Heirin received this amulet because that now was part of Circle Meriptah. Changwu listened and understood what had happened. His knowledge only just purchased Heirin instead in the elite of network. From middle level, she rose to level which has reached over decades of work, over 5 weeks. Thanks him. He asked what next. Rin replied, what next work? Advice gave her a mandate to counter Amon. Not direct, secret. The first task, stop the transfer. 3 villages to south of Karnak. Changwu knew that in real story, the transfer took place. The villages moved to the Temple of Amun. The fact recorded in an papyrus. But if Rin intervenes, this fact may not happen. And then the historic course will change. And his knowledge about the future will lose accuracy. a paradox. Each time when he successfully used his knowledge to change events, he devalued the rest knowledge. Every victory made the next less certain. He said about this, "Hey Rin." Exactly. She had to understand the limitation. Hey Rin listened and paused to think. Then she asked, "What is more important, the village today or the accuracy of tomorrow?" Chang Wu replied that it's her decision, not his. He provides information. She makes a choice. He Rin smiled. She said that he was, quickly, to be useful but not responsible. This skill of a slave, or a diplomat. The difference is small. She chose village. 3 villages to south of Karnak were important not as the earth, as a resource. Grain, labor, taxes. Loss of 3 villages meant a weakening of the Temple of Sekhmet in Karnak, and weakening of Node weakened the network. Meriptak this. That is why she gave the mandate. Hirin began plan the operation, and for the first time, Chang Wu was involved, not as a source of, but as a tactician. She described the problem. Bakan Hansu will submit a petition to the pharaoh through 3 months, at the Opeta, grand annual holiday when the statue of Amun is carried from Karnak to Luxor. 27 days processions and rituals. The pharaoh personally participates. Bakan Khansu will choose the moment when Ramses will, in good, in high spirits. After a successful sacrifice, after generous offerings, she would present her petition as a modest request. 3 small villages for the temple's needs. A trifle for a pharaoh who rules from the delta to Nubia. Ramses would sign without a second thought. Hirin wanted to prevent this, but she couldn't speak out directly against Bakan Khansu. The Order of Sekhmet operated in the shadows. Open confrontation with the cult of Amun meant war, and war would attract the pharaoh's attention. And the pharaoh's attention to the secret activities of the priestesses of Sekhmet was the last thing any of them needed. Chang Wu thought for 3 hours. He paced the workshop, sat down, stood up, paced again. Heirin left and left him alone, with papyrus and ink. He began jotting down options. 3 ways to stop the petition. First, discredit Bakan Hansu before the pharaoh. Difficult. Bakan Hansu was flawless. 60 years of service without a single blemish. His reputation was rock solid. Second, kill Bakan Hansu. Technically possible. The Order of Sekhmet specialized in poisons, but the death of the High Priest of Amun would trigger an investigation, and suspicion would automatically fall on Sekhmet. Too risky. Third, ensure the petition never reaches the pharaoh. Do not destroy the petitioner, destroy the petition. Chan Wu settled on the third option. He began to recall everything he knew about the Opet festival during the reign of Ramses II. Details. The procession route. The protocol. The order of audiences. He knew this from several sources. The reliefs in the Luxor temple. A papyrus describing the festival from the Turin Museum. An article on the economics of festival rituals. During Opet, the pharaoh distributed gifts, many gifts, bread, beer, meat, gold, to the temples, the priests, and the people. The gifts were distributed according to a list drawn up in advance. The vizier approved the list, not the pharaoh, the vizier. That was the key point. Bakan Khansu submitted a petition to the pharaoh, but the pharaoh passed it on to the vizier for execution. And the vizier decided the details, timelines, conditions, scope. If the vizier delayed the execution of the petition for 6 months to a year, it was tantamount to a refusal. Because in a year, the situation would change. New petitions would appear. The old ones would lose priority. Bureaucracy is capable of burying any decision without a single word of opposition. Chan Wu wrote the plan on papyrus. Do not stop Bakan Khansu. Do not touch the pharaoh. Work with the vizier of the new kingdom under Ramses II. Chang Wu knew two names, Passer, vizier of the south, and Prahotep, vizier of the north. The petition regarding the villages south of Karnak went through Passer. Chang Wu remembered his tomb, number 106 in the Valley of the Nobles. Large, rich. The walls are covered with scenes from the vizier's life, trials, audiences, inspections. Chang Wu had seen this tomb in photographs, and he remembered one detail. On one of the walls, Pazer is depicted receiving offerings from the Temple of Mut. Not from the Temple of Amun, from the Temple of Mut, the temple where Chang Wu was currently located. This meant that a connection between the vizier and the cult of Sekhmet existed. It was documented, officially. Pazer had ties to the Temple of Mut. When Hayrin returned, he showed her the map. She read slowly, traced her finger along the lines, stopped at Pazer's name. She looked at Chang Wu. She said that Pazer was an ally, a long-standing one. The Temple of Mut had provided him with services. She didn't specify exactly what kind, but the connection existed and was strong. Chang Wu nodded. He had suspected it, and history had confirmed it. Or perhaps the other way around. The line between knowledge and conjecture was blurring. He laid out the plan in full. Hayrin approaches Pazer before the Opet festival. She warns that Bakan Hansu will submit a petition. She asks him to delay its execution. Not to refuse, to delay. To create a bureaucratic obstacle. To request an additional inspection of the villages. To demand a recalculation of taxes. Any formal pretext. Passer delays. Bakan Hansu receives the pharaoh's approval, but does not receive the villages. Month after month, year after year. And when Bakan Hansu finally realizes he has been outmaneuvered, it will be too late. The villages will remain with the Temple of Mut. Hayrin rolled up the papyrus. She placed it in a leather case, next to the map of the underground corridors and the dossier on the priests of Amun. The case was getting thicker, just like the bond between her and Chang Wu. She said the plan was good, that she would meet with Passer next week, and that Chang Wu would go with her. Chang Wu looked up. He hadn't misheard. He would go, beyond the temple, beyond the walls that had held him for 6 weeks. Hayrin saw his reaction and shook her head. She told him not to get his hopes up, that they weren't taking him for a walk, that Pacer would want to see the source of the information in person, like Meripta, and that every new person who saw his face was one more person who could give him away, or kill him. She left. Chang Wu remained in the workshop with a blank papyrus and a head full of thoughts. Vizier Pacer, the third most powerful man in the state, after the pharaoh and the high priest of Amun. And he, Chang Wu, was about to sit before him and explain how to deceive the most powerful priest in the country. An illegal archaeologist from the 21st century, advising the vizier of ancient Egypt on bureaucratic maneuvers. The absurdity of the situation was so complete that it ceased to be absurd. It became the norm, the new norm of his existence. The meeting with Pazer was scheduled in 4 days. Hayrin used this time to prepare. Not yours, his. Every evening she came to the workshop and spent with him through 2 hours. She taught him the protocol, how to stand before the vizier, how to bow, what words to use and which to avoid, where to look, where not look, how to mere hands. The vizier was the third person in the state. Error in the record meant an insult. An insult of the vizier meant death. A swift one, public, without trial. Chang Wu learned quickly. He always learned quickly. That was his main quality. Even before that, then he ended up here. In illegal excavations, the pace of one meant the difference between success and failure, of the ceiling on head. Here, it meant the difference between life and execution. On second day, He-Rin brought clothes for the meeting. Not rude Shenti servants. Long linen shirt down the ankles. White, lightweight, pleated. Waistband made of red leather with a bronze buckle. Sandals made calfskin leather. And wig. A short black wig made human hair, standard for men of rank. Changwu put on a wig and looked at his reflection in bronze mirror, which Neferu. He didn't recognize himself. Asian features remained, but he changed the outline of the head. Clothing changed the silhouette. He looked like something he pretended to be. The translator of texts at the Temple Mut. Specialist, not outsider. Professional at duty. He-Rin examined him critically. She adjusted her belt, pulled the hem of her shirt. She said that he is almost convincing. Almost. His gait gave him away a foreigner. The Egyptians walked differently. Straight back, short stride, chin slightly raised. He walked like a man who was used to bend over, bend his head. The habit of tombs, low ceilings, narrow passages. 8 years he climbed around places where you stand up straight, and the body has remembered. He spent the remaining 2 days on that to retrain the body. I used to, around the workshop, with a pitcher of water on his head. Old trick. If the pitcher doesn't falls, you're as one. On third day, the pitcher stopped falling. On fourth, in the morning, they went from the temple. For the first time in 6 weeks, Changwu saw Karnak outside. He stopped and forgot breathe. Karnak. Living Karnak. Not ruins that he saw in inn. Not scattered columns and debris walls in the sand. A whole city of stone and light. Giant pylons covered vivid reliefs. Avenues of sphinxes stretching toward the horizon. Obelisks glistening with golden tips against the sun. Flags made red fabric on masts in front of each entrance. Thousands people. Priests in white. Scribes with papyrus under arm. Soldiers in leather armor. Merchants, porters, slaves with jugs on their heads. And over it all this sky. Cloudless, vast, blue to pained in eyes. He-Rin didn't let him time to admire. She walked forward with stride, and he had follow. For them followed Neferu, 3 steps behind, like security. They passed through the south gate of the complex and exited onto the leading to Thebes, the capital, the city of the living in the eastern bank of the Nile. The temples were on this same shore, but just on a side from residential neighborhoods. The road was wide, tamped ground. Along both sides, channels with murky green water, palm trees, fields, farmers bent over the fields, buffalo pulling plows, the smell of manure and wet soil, a smell, not museum-like. They walked 40 minutes. Rin didn't speak, Neferu either. Changwu was watching. He took it all in. Every detail was information. Every house along the road, every well, every bridge across the canal. He checked what he had seen with what I knew from textbooks. The similarities were striking, and the differences as well. The textbooks did not convey the colors. They conveyed sounds. They conveyed the smell, the earth, and blooming lotus mixed with smoke from hearths. The residence of the vizier stood on eastern outskirts Thebes. Great house made adobe brick with stone foundation. 2 stories. Garden behind the wall. Guards at the gate. 4 soldiers with spears and woven shields. He-Rin approached a senior guard and showed the amulet. No Meripta's Meripthak, another one. His own sign of the Muth. Copper scarab on a leather cord. The guard looked at the amulet and, without saying, let them inside. The garden. A small but well-kept. Pomegranate trees. A pond with fish. Shade and coolness after the scorching journey. The servant led them across garden to the side entrance. Do not through the door, through service passage, secret meeting. The vizier did want for the visit of the priestess Sekhmet be recorded. They entered a small room with windows facing the courtyard. The walls were whitewashed. The floor of packed clay was covered with reed mats, wooden furniture, chairs, a table, jugs of water and wine. Pazer sat at the table eating grapes. Chanwu looked at him and compared him to what he knew. Passer, vizier of the south. His statue stood in the Cairo Museum. Chanwu had seen it dozens of times. A broad face, a large nose, a heavy chin. The statue was idealized but recognizable. The living Passer was heavier, fuller, with a flabby belly that bulged out from under his shirt. Thick hands, short fingers, his face red from the heat and the wine. He didn't stand up when they entered. He gestured toward the chairs. Heirin sat down. Changwu remained standing, as he had been taught. The interpreter stands until the vizier allows him to sit. Passer looked at him, an appraising gaze, not as sharp as Meripthok's, more languid, the gaze of a man accustomed to power and in no need of demonstrating sharpness. He asked Heirin who this was. Heirin replied with a prepared answer. An interpreter, an expert on Eastern affairs, a man with unique sources of information on the political situation in the region. The vizier nodded. He gestured for Changwu to take a seat. Changwu sat down. Heirin began to present the case. She spoke for 20 minutes, without pauses, without repetition. Facts. Bakan Honsu is preparing a petition. 3 villages. The petition will be submitted during the Opet. The pharaoh will approve it. The vizier will be responsible for its implementation. She suggests that the vizier delay the implementation, not to refuse it, to delay it. A formal pretext is sufficient for this. An inspection, a recount, a verification of land boundaries. Any bureaucratic procedure that will take 6 months or a year. Passer listened and ate grapes, one berry at a time, slowly. When Heirin finished, he placed the bunch of grapes on the table and wiped his fingers on a linen napkin. Then he asked one question. Why should he do this? Heirin looked at Changwu. It was his turn. Changwu spoke up. His Egyptian had become fluent in 6 weeks. Not perfect, but fluent. The accent remained, but the words flowed without a hitch. He told the vizier what he would not have said under other circumstances. He said that the strengthening of the Temple of Amun threatened not only the cult of Sekhmet, it threatened the vizier personally. Pazer stopped chewing. Changwu continued. He said that in 10 years, the priests of Amun would control so much land and resources that they would be able to influence the appointment of officials, including viziers. That the Temple of Amun would become a state within a state, with its own army of scribes and an economy that would exceed the treasuries of several nomes. That any vizier who allowed this to happen would lose his independence. He would become an executor of the high priest's will, not the pharaoh's. Pazer was silent. His face betrayed nothing. But Changwu saw him clench the napkin in his fist, an involuntary movement. A vizier dependent on a priest. It was a nightmare for any official. Loss of autonomy. Loss of direct access to the pharaoh. Transformation from a third-ranking state official into a puppet. Passer asked where he had obtained such information. Changwu replied that it came from an analysis of current trends. The Temple of Amun is expanding. The pace of expansion is accelerating. The math is simple. If the process isn't stopped, the outcome is predictable. Passer looked at Heirin. She sat motionless, calm, stone-faced, a mask that gave nothing away. The vizier turned back to Changwu and asked a second question. What would happen if he delayed the petition? What is his gain? Changwu replied, the gain is threefold. First, the vizier maintains a balance between the cults, a balance that gives him room to maneuver. Second, The Temple of Mut remains indebted to the vizier, a great debt, one that can be called in when needed. Third, the vizier demonstrates to Bakan Hans that there are limits, that even the pharaoh's approval does not guarantee execution if the vizier does not agree. It is a signal, subtle but clear. Passer was silent for 30 seconds. Then he took a grape and put it in his mouth. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and he spoke a single sentence. He said that the inspection of the southern villages would be scheduled for the following week. Chang Wu showed no relief. He didn't smile, he didn't sigh. He kept a straight face, just as he'd been taught, just as protocol demanded. Inside, he was singing, but on the outside, he was a stone, just like Heireen. The meeting continued for another hour. Details, deadlines, wording. Passer turned out to be a meticulous bureaucrat, which was to be expected of a man in his position. Every procedure had to be flawless. No trace of intent. Only the conscientious fulfillment of duties. Inspection, recount, request for additional documents. Standard red tape that could drag on indefinitely if no one applied pressure from above. And there would be no one to apply pressure, because the pharaoh had already signed and forgotten. Bakan Kansu would be angry. But getting angry at bureaucracy is like getting angry at the sand in the desert. Pointless. They left the residence the same way, through the service entrance, through the garden, past the guards, out onto the scorching road. Heireen was silent the whole way back. Only when they entered the gates of Karnak did she turn to him and say that he had spoken well. 2 words. Spoken well. It was the highest praise he had ever heard from her, and it meant more than any amulet with 3 scratches. A week after the meeting with Passer, the phone died. Chang Wu pressed the button in the morning, and the screen didn't light up. 0%. He was a dead rectangle in his hands, and felt as at the last thread the connection with his world, with his time, with his past. Now he have nothing but memory. He put the phone on bottom the bag in which he kept his old clothes. T-shirt with the teps of university, jeans, sneakers, artifacts from another life. Useless. But he could get rid of them. It was anchor, not physical, psychological. The proof that he is crazy, that his world existed, that he real. Rin noticed a change in him that she entered the workshop and stopped. She looked at his face and asked what had happened. He replied that glowing stone had died. Rin was silent, then asked, kept he everything that was inside? Chang Wu touched his temple. Here. Everything here. She nodded and walked to the matter. Inspection of the villages began. Passer sent 3 scribes with a mandate to a recount. Land plots, canals, yield, population, livestock. Clerks will work 3 months, at least. Bakan Hansu, another, didn't know about the inspection. When finds out, too late. The machine is running. Rin has to a topic. She said that the council had another operation. On Meriptha's recommendation. Intelligence from the Hittite court. The peace treaty between Egypt and the Hittites had been in effect for several years. But peace did not mean trust. The Hittites were allies on paper and rivals in practice. Both sides spied on each other constantly. Meriptha wanted to know what was happening at Hattusili's court. Not the official version. The real one. Court intrigues. The struggle for the throne. Military preparations. And she believed that Chan Wu could help. Chan Wu could. He knew the Hittite kingdom less well than the Egyptian one, but still better than anyone else in the world. He knew that Hattusili III had seized power through a coup, overthrowing his nephew, Urhi Teshub. He knew that Teshub had fled to Egypt and lived at the court of Ramses as a political refugee. He knew that the Hittites demanded his extradition, and that this was the main source of tension between the two powers, even after the peace treaty. And he knew how it would all end. The Hittite kingdom would fall in 100 years. The sea peoples would destroy it. Hattusa would be burned to the ground. The empire would vanish completely. Only ruins and clay tablets would remain of it. But this knowledge was strategic, long-term. Meripta wanted tactics for the coming years, and here Chang Wu could provide specifics. He began to speak. Rin took notes. Hattusili is old and ill. His wife, Puduhepa, effectively runs the state. She is strong, intelligent, diplomatic. It was she who initiated the peace treaty with Egypt, and it is she who is now negotiating a dynastic marriage. Hattusili's daughter will become Ramses's wife. This will happen in a few years, a grand event. A Hittite princess in the pharaoh's harem, a symbol of peace between two superpowers. Rin stopped writing. She raised her head and looked at him with an expression he had learned to recognize. She was weighing the consequences. A Hittite princess in Egypt meant Hittite influence at court, a new player in an already crowded political arena, new alliances, new conflicts, new opportunities for the Order of Sekhmet. She asked when exactly the marriage would take place. Chang Wu racked his brain. The 34th year of Ramses's reign. If it's the 28th now, that means in 6 years. 6 years of preparation. That was a whole field for maneuver. Rin rolled up the papyrus and put it away in its case. She said she would send the information to Meripta with the next courier. Then she asked a question that caught him off guard. She asked if he had thought about escaping. Chang Wu remained silent. 3 seconds. 5. Rin waited and continued. She said she knew about his interest in the walled-up corridor in the eastern wall of the middle level, that the guards had noticed him tapping on the cell wall 2 weeks ago, that she hadn't taken any action because escape was impossible, and she wanted to see how far his planning would go. Chang Wu felt a chill in his stomach. He was sure he'd tapped the wall quietly, at night, when the corridor was empty. But the corridor wasn't empty. He was being watched. Always. Rin said there was nowhere to run, that outside the temple he was nobody, a foreigner without papers, without a patron, without knowledge of local customs at the everyday level. He would die from the heat in the desert or from a knife in the very first town he came to. She said his only protection was her. The only safe place was the temple. The only role in which he could survive was the one she had given him. Chang Wu listened and knew she was right. Partially. Escape was indeed nearly impossible, but not entirely. A walled-up corridor led to the lower level. The lower level had a secret exit beyond the temple walls, an exit known only to 2 people, Rin and him. If he broke through the wall, if he made his way through the lower level, if he found the exit, he could end up outside the walls of Karnak without the guards knowing. But Rin was right about the main thing. Beyond the walls, he had nowhere to go. Another city, another temple, another mistress, or death. Choosing between different cages isn't freedom. He looked at Rin and said he hadn't planned to escape, that he'd been tapping the wall out of professional curiosity, that old habits die hard. Rin smiled, a full smile, for the first time in all the time he'd known her. The smile transformed her face, made her look younger, softer. For a second, she didn't look like the head of the Secret Service, but like a woman amused by someone else's lie. She said his habits were very useful, and that she needed that very habit, tapping on walls, searching for voids, finding what's hidden. Because in a month, construction of a new hall at the Temple of Amun would begin in Karnak. Bakin Khonsu had launched a massive project, and Rin wanted to know what lay hidden beneath the foundation of the future structure. Hiding places, burials, Old utility lines, anything that could be used. Chang Wu nodded. Archaeological reconnaissance, his main specialty, the very reason he had studied for 10 years and risked his life for 8. Only now, instead of ancient tombs, he was surveying an active temple. Instead of dead pharaohs, his opponents were living priests. And instead of a prison sentence for illegal excavations, he faced death. The scale had changed. The essence remained. To find what was hidden before anyone else. Reconnaissance of was operation of order. Not secret consultation in closed workshop. Not analysis of documents. Field work. In very heart enemy territory. The Temple of Amun was the largest religious complex on Earth. 15 hectares, dozens of buildings, hundreds of columns, thousands servants. To enter, there could. During daytime, the complex was open to pilgrims, merchants, and officials. But walk through it with professional interest in the fundamentals and underground structures, this entirely matter. Herein has a cover story. Chang Wu was walking as an assistant inspector to Vizier Passer. Inspection of the site before starting work. A formality. Bureaucratic routine. He issued the relevant paper with seal. Genuine. The vizier played his move, and this game demanded reciprocal favors. On the morning the 8th day of the 3rd month Ahet, Chang Wu went out from the moot and headed toward north, through the avenue of sphinxes with rams' heads, past the sacred lake, to first pylon of the Temple of Amun. He walked alone, without Hirin, without Neferu. The legend did provide accompaniment priestesses of Sekhmet. The inspector goes with scribe. The scribe was Chang Wu, one of a papyrus and a reed quill, and with head full knowledge that allowed him see what was invisible. He passed through first pylon and ended up in large courtyard, an open space. Colossal columns along the perimeter. Statue of Ramses at the entrance to the second pylon. 20 meters of granite. Chang Wu didn't stop. He indulge admiration. He was at work. He went through second pylon in hypostyle hall, and here stopped. Not out admiration, out professional shock. Hypostyle hall of Karnak, 114 columns. Height of the central 23 meters. The diameter 3.5 meters. He knew these numbers. He had about them. I've seen photos and reconstructions. But to stand between these columns when they were whole, and covered vibrant paintings, and roof above them a hole, and light falls through the upper windows in columns of golden dust, this was different. He allowed himself 10 seconds. 10 seconds of standing with his head tilted back. Then he lowered his eyes and began to work. The construction site was located east of the hypostyle hall. Bakan Hansu was planning a new hall for ceremonial occasions. The site had already been cleared. Servants had removed the old structures. The stone had been hauled away. The earth lay bare. Chang Wu walked to the edge of the site and crouched down. He examined the soil. Tamped clay mixed with fragments of broken brick. Construction debris from previous eras. He knew that beneath this layer lay the remains of earlier structures. A Middle Kingdom temple. Even deeper, an Old Kingdom temple. Karnak had been built on top of itself for 2,000 years. Each pharaoh demolished part of the old and built the new. Layer upon layer, era upon era. For an archaeologist, it was a dream. For a scout, it was a field of possibilities. He began surveying the site, slowly, around the perimeter. He wrote on papyrus, not what he saw, what he felt. The sole of his left foot sensed changes in the ground better than the right, a professional trait. Years of walking through tombs had taught him to sense voids beneath his feet, vibration, elasticity, the sound of a step. On solid ground, the step is dull and short. Over a void, the sound is slightly more resonant, barely noticeable, but he noticed it. In the northeast corner of the site, he sensed a difference. The ground gave way. Half a centimeter, maybe less. He stopped, crouched down, tapped the ground with his knuckles. Hollow. Then he shifted a step to the right and tapped again. Slightly more resonant. A void. A meter or a meter and a half underground, there was a space, a chamber, a tunnel, a collector, something. He recorded the coordinates, relative to the northeast corner of the site, 4 steps to the west, 2 to the south. He continued his patrol, found 2 more spots with similar signs, one at the southern edge of the site, the other closer to the center. 3 voids. 3 potential entry points into underground structures that the builders of Bakken Hansu didn't know about, or knew and kept quiet. He finished the patrol in 2 hours. No one stopped him. No one asked what a stranger was doing with a papyrus on a construction site. The papyrus bearing the vizier's seal was a universal pass. Bureaucracy worked both ways. It could stifle initiative, and it could open any door. On his way back to the Temple of Mut, Chan Wu took a detour. He walked past the granaries south of the hypostyle hall. Here stood large mud brick granaries, the grain stores of the Temple of Amun. He counted 12 in operation, and 3 under construction. 3 new granaries, each with a capacity of about 50 tons of grain, 150 tons of additional capacity. For grain the temple did not yet have. Bakken Hansu was building infrastructure for resources he planned to obtain. 3 villages south of Karnak, which Passer was currently inspecting, which Bakken Hansu already considered his own. Chang Wu smiled, subtly, briefly. The granaries would remain empty. That evening, he laid out the data before Heirin. A papyrus with markings, 3 empty spaces beneath the site, 3 new granaries. Heirin studied the site plan in silence. Then she poked her finger at the northeast corner. She said she knew what was there. An old well, filled in during the reign of Thutmose III, 200 years ago. The well went down 9 meters. At the bottom, a side passage to an underground spring. If it were cleared, one could enter the foundation of the new hall through it, from below, unnoticed. Chang Wu asked why. Heirin replied, if certain objects were placed in the foundation of the new hall, it could have consequences. Ritual ones. She didn't elaborate. Chang Wu didn't ask. He understood. A curse, or an imitation of one. Objects in the foundation that Amun's priests would discover and interpret as a bad omen. Construction would halt. Bakken Hansu would lose face. His project would fail. Chang Wu sat and thought about boundaries. He provided information. Heirin made the decisions. But the information determined the decisions. Without his data on the voids beneath the site, this operation would have been impossible. He was an accomplice, not an executor, but an architect. The line between observer and participant had been erased for good. He was no longer describing history. He was changing it. And every change carried him further away from the future he knew. In the textbooks, the new Bakken Hansu Hall had been built. It had stood for 3,000 years. Its ruins had survived into the 21st century. If construction stopped, those ruins would not exist. And some article that Chang Wu had read in college would turn out to be a description of a non-existent building. The paradox was growing. Every action he took created a divergence between the history he knew and the history he was making. Sooner or later, the divergence would become critical, and his knowledge would turn from an advantage into an illusion. He told Heirin about this, for the 3rd time. She nodded, for the 3rd time, and said that the world changes every day, that knowledge that becomes outdated isn't useless. It shows the way. A map that differs from the terrain is still better than no map at all. Chang Wu thought that was the wisest thing he'd heard in 2 months. and that Heirin would make an excellent scientist in his world, or an excellent general. The difference is small. Operation with the well was scheduled for the night of the new moon, 12 days. Heirin was it herself. Without involving other priestesses, other Neferu, then fewer people, the fewer leaks. This was her principle. Changwu did participate in the operation. His task was exclusively technical. Route, depth, distances, waypoint bookmark. He drew a diagram on papyrus, from the entrance to well to the passage. From side pass to point, under northeast corner of the future foundation. Total distance 27 meters. From me of 9 meters of vertical descent. He indicated the depth at which he placed the items. 1.5 meters from the surface. Deep to not find under ordinary earthwork. It is sufficient, shallow to be found under laying the foundation. Heirin studied the place and asked one question. Is it safe? Is well? Changwu answered honestly. He didn't know. The well had filled in 200 years ago. To 200 years the walls could be cracked. The masonry could weaken. Groundwater may rise or have receded. It could have a plank, but could guarantee its safety. Heirin nodded. She didn't expect guarantees. She expected honesty, and got it. In 4 days before the place and a rin that changed the balance of power, Bakan Hansu learned about inspections of the villages. Heirin right away, after 3 weeks after its start. When his people in one of the villages reported that the scribes of the vizier are counting the harvest and measure land plots, Bakan Hansu was in fury. Quiet, controlled, but rage. Changwu found out about this from Neferu. She now regularly shared with him information did on order Heirin, on his initiative. Their informal agreement worked. It gave him information from temple circles. He gave her predictions, small ones, specific, harmless. Who will a promotion? What holiday will be postponed? Whose wife will give birth to a son? Trivialities that were confirmed and reinforced his reputation in her eyes. Neferu told that Bakan Hansu had summoned Unnefer and 2 hours shouted at him from behind through the doors. Unnefer emerged pale and drenched in sweat. Bakan Hansu believed that Unnefer had leaked information about the petition, that someone had learned of the plans and warned the vizier. He was right. But he didn't know exactly who. And his suspicion fell not on the cult of Sekhmet, but on rivals within his own temple. The priests of Amun were not a monolith. Factions, cliques, personal ambitions. Bakan Hansu saw enemies among his own. Changwu appreciated the irony. The internal conflict within the temple of Amun worked in their favor better than any sabotage. While Bakan Hansu was searching for a traitor among his own, he wasn't looking in Sekhmet's direction. He relayed this assessment to Heirin. She agreed, and added a detail. She said that one of Amun's junior priests, named Amenemhet, had been secretly working for the Order of Sekhmet for 3 years. Not for ideological reasons, for money. Amenemhet was a gambler. He was losing silver at Senate. He was racking up debts. Heirin paid off his debts in exchange for information. Small tidbits, schedules, names of visitors, the content of public prayers, which sometimes contained political messages. Now Amenemhet could become a scapegoat. If Bakan Hansu was looking for a traitor among his own, suspicion could be steered in the right direction. Changwu listened and felt a chill down his spine. Amenemhet, a man he had never seen, a gambler and a debtor who sold secrets for silver. If suspicion fell on him, he would be executed. Or worse. The Temple of Amun had its own methods of punishment, and Heirin considered this option calmly, like a move on a game board. Changwu remained silent. He had no say in this decision, and he didn't want one, because every choice was a bad one. Defending Amenemhet meant jeopardizing the operation. Remaining silent meant becoming an accomplice to someone else's death. He chose silence, and he hated himself for it. At night, he lay in his cell and stared at the ceiling. Amenemhet, a name he wouldn't find in any textbook, in any article, in any museum. A small man, invisible, insignificant to history, significant to himself. Chang-Wu knew the fates of pharaohs and high priests. He knew the dates of great battles and the construction of great temples. But he knew nothing about the people who lived between the lines of these stories, about the junior priests who gambled away their silver, about the laundresses who washed the linen garments, about the soldiers who stood guard at the gates. These people left no traces. Their lives and deaths were invisible to the future. And Chang-Wu was now playing a part in ensuring that yet another invisible life ended in an invisible death. That morning, he arrived at the workshop earlier than usual. He-Rin wasn't there yet. He sat down and waited. When she entered, he spoke first. He said that handing Amenemhat over was a bad strategy, not because it's cruel, because it's ineffective. He-Rin stopped. She looked at him. She waited for him to continue. He explained, "If Amenemhet comes under suspicion, Bakan Hans will interrogate him. And during interrogation, people say everything. And Amenemhet will tell them about Sekhmet, about the money, about his contacts. The chain of evidence would lead to He-Rin. Not immediately, through 2 or 3 links, but it would lead there. The best option. Amenemhet would continue working. Not a suspect, a useful asset. And Bakan Khansu's suspicion needed to be directed at someone not connected to Sekhmet, at a real rival within the Temple of Amun." He-Rin sat down. She folded her arms. She thought. She asked who. Chang-Wu answered. Ramasanakht, Bakan Hansu's future successor, a young, ambitious priest who was biding his time. If Bakan Hansu believes that Ramasanakht is working against him, it will create a rift in the leadership of the Temple of Amun, a rift that would weaken the temple from within. Without a single drop of poison, without a single murder. He-Rin looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded slowly. She said he thought like the priestess Sekhmet. It was a compliment, or a diagnosis. Chang-Wu wasn't sure. The operation in the well took place on the night of the new moon. Chang-Wu did not participate. He waited in the cell. Nefru descended into the well alone, light on her feet, quick, quiet, trained for night operations. She carried a leather bag with items, clay figurines, amulets inscribed with curses, red pots bearing the names of enemies, a standard set from the repertoire of black magic, not real, theatrical. Objects that the priests of Amun would find and interpret as a sign of divine wrath. Construction would halt, an investigation would begin. Purification rituals, weeks of delay, maybe months. Neferu returned 3 hours later, dirty, with scraped hands and knees. The well was deeper than the diagram showed. The side passage had partially collapsed. She made it through, but barely. She said the items were buried, at the specified depth, in the specified location, buried and camouflaged. Chang-Wu asked if she was okay. Neferu looked at him in surprise. No one had ever asked her that. She was a tool, just like him. Tools don't ask each other how they're feeling. She replied that she was fine, and she left. Chang-Lu lay down on the mat. The operation was complete. The items were in the ground. In a few weeks, when the builders began digging the foundation, they would find the curses. And Bakun Hansu would face a problem that couldn't be solved by bureaucracy. A problem that only the gods could solve. And as we know, the gods are in no hurry. The objects were found after 19 days. A deft was a trench for the foundation in northeast corner of the site. Shovel of one of the workers struck against something hard at a depth 1.5 meters. He dug it up. Red clay pot with a broken neck. Inside, a rolled-up papyrus with text and 3 clay figurines with arms, hands. The workers shouted and threw shovel. About an hour after discovered, all Karnak Changwu heard the news from Neferu. She came to the workshop in the middle of them with a bunch of li, on which the celebration and anxiety. She said that Bakan Hansu personally had come down into the trench. He examined the objects. He turned pale. I ordered to stop the work. He summoned the priest readers to decipher the papyrus. The text was written in hieratic script, old style, deliberately archaic. Changwu composed it himself. 2 weeks spent the wording. I used the vocabulary from Pyramid, which to this time had ancient biro to the Egyptians. The text cursed anyone who build on this place. He cursed his name, his ka, his ba, his children and his children to the 7th generation. Standard curse, but written in a language which the priests Aman date to be. This was the key point. Not fresh, a fake, but an ancient warning. A curse from ancestors. A voice from the depths, centuries. Bakan Hansu could ignore. He was the high priest. His power was based on faith, on respect for the gods and ancestors. To build a temple on cursed place meant to challenge the divine order. Even if personally he didn't believe in, his priests believed. His workers believed him. The people believed. And reputation was more in any building. Construction came to a halt. Hurin was exactly this. But the consequences turned out beyond her plans. And beyond the limits, forecasts Changwu. Bakan Hansu does just stopped construction. He ordered an investigation. A full one. 24 specialist priests. Among them, experts of ancient texts, experts of magic, experts of structures. They inspected the site. They found an old well. We found traces of a recent intrusion, fresh scratches on the walls, crumbling soil, traces of soft clay of the passage. The objects were placed. This became clear after 3 days. Bakan Hansu arrived into a rage. Real, not quiet or controlled like after inspection's village. Roaring. He shouted at his subordinates for an hour. His voice was in the light of the temple. Changwu knew about this from Amenemhet through Neferu. The chain of worked. Bakan Hansu believed that it's sabotage. He was right. He believed that behind was someone from his competitors. He was almost right. But his rival was not inside the Temple of Amun, but outside. In small temple across the street. The investigation has expanded. Bakan Hansu sent people to check all underground entrances in the vicinity of the site. Manholes, old drainage channels, abandoned basements. His people were a way through which the saboteurs. Hirin arrived to the workshop in the evening, and for the first time in a time, Changwu saw tension on her face. Not fear, tension. The difference is subtle but significant. Fear paralyzes. Tension mobilizes. She said that the Bakan Hansu investigation might reach the well. The well leads south, to the territory of the Moot Temple. If the investigators follow the route, they'll reach the border of her territory. And they'll start asking questions. Changwu thought. Quickly. The well had to be destroyed. Collapsed. Buried so that no investigation could trace the route. He told Heirin this. She shook her head. Collapsing the well would attract attention. Noise, dust, vibration. The workers on the site would notice. Changwu suggested something else. Not a collapse. A flood. An underground spring that the side passage led to. If they removed the stones holding back the water, the spring would fill the well. Slowly, over several days. The water would destroy the evidence. It would wash away the clay. It would wash away the fingerprints. When the Bakyonsu investigators reached the well, they would find only a flooded shaft. An old one. An abandoned one. Filled with groundwater. Nothing suspicious. Heirin considered the plan. She asked who would go. Changwu replied that he would. It was his well, his plan, his responsibility. and he was the only one who knew exactly where the stones blocking the spring were located. Exclusive videos, story continuations, and bonus content are already available on Patreon before YouTube, so check the link in the description for early access to all new recaps and continuations.